Subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin this one. The fluorescent lights of Maddox Biotech hummed overhead as Harvey Maddox stared at the test results on his monitor, his jaw tightening with each passing second. 12 years of work. 12 years of 18-hour days, maxed out credit cards, and sleepless nights. And now, at 42 years old, watching the compound degradation data scroll across his screen, Harvey knew the truth. BioStim 7, the breakthrough treatment that had attracted $40 million in investor funding and pushed his company's valuation to $15 million, was fundamentally flawed. The cellular toxicity level spiked after prolonged exposure. Not immediately, not in the short-term trials that had everyone celebrating. But after 6 months of continuous use, the treatment that was supposed to regenerate damaged neural pathways was instead causing microscopic hemorrhaging in brain tissue. The FDA would never approve it. Worse, if the current human trials continued, people could die. Harvey had built Maddox Biotech from nothing. Fresh out of his doctorate program at Stanford, he'd worked as a researcher for 3 years at a major pharmaceutical company, watching bureaucrats kill innovation with red tape. So he'd taken his savings, a second mortgage on a house he didn't own yet, and partnered with Mitchell Day, a smooth-talking MBA who promised to handle the business side, while Harvey focused on the science. That was 11 years ago. Now, the company employed 23 people, had 3 products in various stages of development, and BioStim 7 was supposed to be their moonshot. The treatment that would change everything. Harvey saved the data to an encrypted drive and locked it in his desk drawer. Outside his office window, the San Diego sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. He should go home. Constance would be waiting for their anniversary dinner reservation at Le Marais, the French restaurant where he'd proposed to her 8 years ago. His phone buzzed. A text from his wife, running late. Meet you there at 8? Harvey replied with a thumbs up and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. Constance had been running late a lot recently. 3 times this week alone. When he'd asked about it yesterday, she'd snapped at him about a project at the marketing firm where she worked as creative director. But her firm had lost its biggest client 2 months ago, and she'd told him they were in a slow period. He pushed the thought away and focused on the immediate crisis. BioStim 7 was going to fail. The question was what to do about it. He could halt the trials immediately, but that would crash the company's valuation overnight. Investors would flee. The board would demand answers. Mitchell would lose his mind. Mitchell Day, Harvey's business partner, the man who'd helped him incorporate the company, who'd brought in the initial angel investors, who negotiated with venture capital firms when Harvey was too busy in the lab to understand term sheets and liquidation preferences. Mitchell owned 30% of the company. Harvey owned 55%, and the remaining 15% was divided among early investors. Harvey shut down his computer and grabbed his jacket. As he walked through the lab, he nodded to Julia Camacho, one of his senior researchers, who was still hunched over a microscope. Go home, Julia, Harvey said. It's past 7. She looked up, pushing her dark hair behind her ear. Says the man who was here when I arrived at 6 this morning. Julia had been with the company for 4 years, brilliant and dedicated, with a PhD from UCLA. I'm close to something on the BioStim 3 protein synthesis. Give me another hour. Harvey managed a smile. 1 hour. Then I'm remotely shutting down your access card. She laughed, and he continued his car. The drive to Le Marais took 20 minutes through evening traffic. He arrived at 7:55, parked, and checked his phone. No new messages from Constance. Inside the restaurant, the maitre d' greeted him warmly. Mr. Maddox, your anniversary, yes? Your table is ready. Harvey followed him to a corner table with a view of the harbor. He ordered a bottle of Bordeaux and waited. 8 o'clock came and went. At 8:15, his phone finally buzzed. So sorry. Something came up at work. Can we reschedule? Tomorrow night? Harvey stared at the message, the familiar knot in his stomach tightening. He typed back, sure. Everything okay? Fine. Just crazy busy. Love you. He didn't respond. Instead, he waved over the waiter, canceled the wine, and ordered scotch. As he sat alone at the table set for 2, Harvey made a decision. He'd been ignoring the signs for months, maybe longer. The distance between them. The way Constance never asked about his work anymore. The mysterious late meetings and client dinners that filled her calendar. Tomorrow, he'd hire someone to find out the truth. 3 days later, Harvey sat in a windowless office in a building downtown, across from Carlos Osborne, a private investigator recommended by Gene Hobbs, Harvey's attorney. Carlos was a former cop turned PI, 45 years old with graying hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd seen everything and wasn't surprised by any of it. "I'll be straight with you, Mr. Maddox," Carlos said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "I've been doing this for 12 years. When someone asks me to follow their spouse, 90% of the time, I find exactly what they're afraid I'll find." Harvey opened the folder. Inside were photographs, time-stamped and dated. Constance entering a hotel in La Jolla. Constance having lunch at an outdoor cafe with a man Harvey recognized immediately. Mitchell Day, his business partner, his friend. More photos. Mitchell and Constance walking on the beach, holding hands. Kissing in the parking lot behind Maddox Biotech's building. Entering Mitchell's condo in the Gaslamp Quarter. Harvey's hands didn't shake. He felt strangely calm, as if he were reviewing data from a failed experiment. Hypothesis tested. Results confirmed. "How long?" he asked. "Based on the patterns I established over the past 3 days and cross-referencing some of your wife's credit card activity that you authorized me to access." Carlos pulled out another sheet. "At least 7 months. Possibly longer. 7 months." Harvey did the math. That was right around when Mitchell had suddenly become very interested in the company's valuation, pushing for a formal assessment from an outside firm. When he'd started talking about succession planning and making sure the corporate structure was optimized. "There's more," Carlos said, his expression darkening. "I did some background work on Day. He's been meeting with a divorce attorney. Della Barber. Aggressive, expensive, specializes in high-asset divorces. I also found evidence he's been in contact with a business valuation firm called Strickland Associates." Harvey looked up sharply. Why would he need a business valuation? "We just had one done 6 months ago." That's what I asked myself. So I made some calls. A friend of mine works at Strickland. She didn't give me specifics, but she mentioned they've been retained for a hostile acquisition scenario involving a biotech company. Carlos leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Maddox, I think your partner and your wife are planning to take your company." The words hung in the air between them. Harvey set down the photographs carefully, lining them up in a neat row on the desk. "In California," Harvey said slowly, "all assets acquired during marriage are community property." "That's right. Maddox Biotech was founded 3 years into your marriage. Unless you have a prenup." "We don't." Carlos nodded. "Then your wife has a strong claim to 50% of your equity in the company. That's 27.5% of the total company. Combined with Day's 30%, they'd have control." Harvey stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Everything he'd built, every sacrifice he'd made, the years of poverty, the student loans, the nights he'd slept in the lab because he couldn't afford the gas to drive home. All of it about to be stolen by the 2 people he'd trusted most. "What do you want to do?" Carlos asked quietly. Harvey turned back, and for the first time since entering the office, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who just solved a complex equation. "I want you to document everything. Every meeting, every conversation you can record legally, every financial transaction. I want to know every single move they make." Harvey pulled out his phone and opened his calendar. "And I need to call my attorney. We're going to need a plan." Gene Hobbs had been practicing law for 30 years, and his corner office in downtown San Diego reflected that success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, mahogany furniture, and walls lined with legal tomes and framed degrees. Harvey had met Gene 5 years ago when Maddox Biotech needed to restructure its corporate governance, and they become more than attorney and client. Gene was one of the few people Harvey considered a genuine friend. Now, sitting across from Gene's massive desk with Carlos Osborne beside him, Harvey laid out the situation. Gene listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his expression grave. "Jesus, Harvey," Gene said when he finished. "I'm sorry. I really am." Constance seemed. He trailed off, searching for words. "Like a devoted wife." Harvey supplied bitterly. Yeah, she had me fooled too. Jean pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Okay, let's talk strategy. California is a no-fault divorce state, which means the affair doesn't matter in terms of asset division. What matters is community property law. Maddox Biotech was founded during your marriage, so Constance has a claim to half of your 55% equity. 27.5%, Harvey said, which, combined with Mitchell's 30%, gives them majority control. Exactly. They can vote you out as CEO, sell the company, liquidate assets, basically whatever they want. Jean tapped his pen against the pad. Now we can fight this. We can argue that you brought specialized knowledge and training into the marriage that formed the foundation of the business. We could try to prove that your contributions were disproportionate. But honestly, Harvey, these fights are expensive. They take years, and the outcome is uncertain. Carlos spoke up. What if we expose the affair? Prove they've been planning this together? It might help in the court of public opinion, but legally? Jean shook his head. California courts don't care. Hell, I've seen cases where one spouse was caught in bed with someone else, and they still got their 50% of the assets. Harvey had been silent, processing. Now he leaned forward. Jean, what's the current valuation of Maddox Biotech? The formal assessment from 6 months ago put it at $15 million. What? And that valuation was based primarily on what? Jean consulted a file. The projected success of BioStim 7, your pipeline of other treatments in development, your intellectual property portfolio, and your client contracts with 3 major hospital networks. Harvey nodded slowly. What if I told you that BioStim 7 is going to fail FDA approval? The room went silent. Jean's eyes widened. What? I discovered it 4 days ago. The compound causes cellular toxicity after prolonged exposure. There's no way to fix it without starting from scratch, which would take another 5 years minimum. When the FDA reviews our Phase 3 data, they'll see the same problems I did. BioStim 7 is dead. Carlos whistled low. And that would affect the company's value? It would crater it, Harvey said flatly. BioStim 7 represents about 60% of our projected value. Without it, Maddox Biotech is worth maybe $4 million. 5 at most. Jean leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. So if Constance gets half your equity in a $4 million company instead of a $15 million company, she gets a lot less than she's expecting. Harvey's expression was grim. But that's not enough. Mitchell and Constance aren't just trying to take my money. They're trying to take everything I built. My reputation, my life's work. They want to push me out and claim credit for my achievements. So what do you want to do? Jean asked. Harvey had been thinking about this for 3 days, ever since Carlos had confirmed his worst fears. He'd barely slept, his mind racing through scenarios, strategies, contingencies. Now, looking at his attorney and the private investigator, he knew exactly what he needed to do. I want to give them the company, Harvey said. Both men stared at him. I'm sorry, Carlos said. Did you just say, I want to give Constance full ownership of Maddox Biotech? Not just half my equity, all of it. Harvey's voice was calm, measured. But before I do, I'm going to make some changes. Strategic changes. Jean was nodding slowly, beginning to understand. You're going to strip out the valuable assets. Not just that. I'm going to saddle the company with liabilities that don't exist yet, but will materialize the moment the FDA rejects BioStim 7. Lawsuits from investors who'll claim they were misled. Breach of contract penalties from the hospital networks. Employee severance packages. Carlos grinned. That's actually brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. Here's what I need, Harvey said, looking at Jean. I need a new corporate entity. Something completely separate from Maddox Biotech. I'm going to start moving my real intellectual property there. The treatments that actually work. BioStim 3 and BioStim 5 are both solid. They're just not as flashy as BioStim 7. I'll hire Julia Camacho and a few other key researchers. We'll work quietly. That takes time, Jean warned. And money. I have some investors I trust. Steven Slater, for one. He's been with me since the beginning, and he's not easily fooled. I'll bring him into the loop. Harvey pulled out his phone and showed them a screenshot. I also have about $2 million in personal savings that Constance doesn't know about. Money I earned before we got married, kept in an account for my grandmother's inheritance. It's not community property. Jean made notes. Okay, I can set up the new entity. We'll call it what? Maddox Therapeutics, Harvey said, and we'll keep it completely under the radar. No press releases. No flashy announcements. Just quiet, solid science. What about Mitchell? Carlos asked. He's going to notice if you start moving assets. Mitchell hasn't been to the lab in 6 months, Harvey said. He barely understands the science. As long as the financial reports look good and BioStim 7 is still in trials, he won't ask questions. Besides, he's too busy sleeping with my wife to pay attention to the details. The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Jean reached across the desk and squeezed Harvey's shoulder. We're going to make this right. I promise you that. There's one more thing, Harvey said. I need Carlos to keep documenting everything. Every meeting between Mitchell and Constance. Every conversation with Delabarber. I want a complete record of their conspiracy. For what purpose? Carlos asked. If the affair doesn't matter in divorce court, it matters in the court of public opinion, Harvey interrupted. Mitchell Day isn't just my business partner. He's also on the board of directors for 3 major biotech industry associations. He's given talks at conferences. He's built a reputation as an ethical businessman. Harvey's smile was cold. When this is over, I want everyone in our industry to know exactly what kind of man he is. Jean and Carlos exchanged glances. Harvey, Jean said carefully, I need to ask, how far are you willing to take this? Harvey thought about the 12 years he'd spent building Maddox Biotech, the nights he'd worked until dawn, the grants he'd written, the investors he'd courted. He thought about bringing Constance to the lab when they were dating, showing her his research with boyish enthusiasm, believing she cared about his dreams. He thought about trusting Mitchell, making him a partner, sharing the burden and the glory. As far as it takes, Harvey said. They want to destroy me? Fine. But when this is done, they're going to wish they'd just walked away. Over the next 2 months, Harvey became a man with 2 lives. In one, he was the concerned husband trying to save his marriage, the dedicated CEO working to bring BioStim 7 to market. In the other, he was a chess player orchestrating the most complex game of his life. He hired Julia Camacho as the first official employee of Maddox Therapeutics, offering her a significant equity stake and a salary increase that made her eyes water. She accepted without hesitation, never asking why they were working nights and weekends in a rented lab space across town instead of at the main biotech facility. You trust me with this? She'd asked when he showed her the BioStim 7 data. You're the only one I trust, Harvey had replied honestly. Julia had 3 younger siblings she was putting through college, a mother with medical bills, and a work ethic that matched his own. More importantly, she'd never sold him out, never taken shortcuts, never put her own advancement ahead of good science. He brought Stephen Slater into the fold as well. Stephen was 50 years old, a venture capitalist who'd invested in Maddox Biotech series of funding round and remained a steady supporter. Over dinner at an Italian restaurant in Del Mar, Harvey laid out everything. Stephen listened, his expression darkening. Mitchell Day is a snake, he said finally. I never trusted him, Harvey. I told you that 6 years ago. You did, Harvey admitted. I should have listened. What do you need from me? $1 million in seed funding from Maddox Therapeutics. Silent partnership. No paperwork that connects it to me publicly until I'm ready. Stephen didn't hesitate. Done. What else? When the divorce hits, I need you to publicly support Constance taking over biotech. I need you to make it look like the investors are confident in her leadership. Stephen's eyebrows rose. You want me to help her steal your company? I want you to help her hang herself, Harvey corrected. Trust me. At home, Harvey played the role of the concerned husband flawlessly. When Constance told him she needed space, he gave it. When she said she was working late, he pretended to believe her. He even suggested they try couples therapy, knowing she'd refuse. I just think we've grown apart, Constance said one night over dinner at their house in La Jolla. She barely looked at him, pushing food around her plate. Maybe we got married too young. We were 30 and 26, Harvey said mildly. That's not that young. You know what I mean. We wanted different things. You wanted to be buried in a lab. I wanted a life. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Harvey had been consumed by his work. He'd missed anniversaries, forgotten birthdays, canceled vacations because of grant deadlines. But he'd done it all to build something, to provide for their future, to make them financially secure. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "I know, I haven't been the husband you deserved." Constance looked up then, surprise flickering across her face. "Harvey, but I want to try. If you'll let me. We could take that trip to Italy you always wanted. I could step back from the company a bit, hire a COO." "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "No, it's too late for that. I think we should talk to lawyers." There it was. Harvey nodded slowly, letting hurt and confusion show on his face. "If that's what you want. It's for the best," Constance said, already pulling away. "We can keep it amicable. Fair division of assets. Clean break." "Sure," Harvey agreed. "Whatever you think is fair." That night, after Constance went to bed early claiming a headache, Harvey sat in his home office and reviewed Carlos Osborne's latest report. Mitchell and Constance had met with Della Barber twice in the past week. They'd also met with Strickland Associates, the business valuation firm. Everything was proceeding exactly as Harvey had predicted. He opened his laptop and checked on the progress of Maddox Therapeutics. Julia had completed the preliminary trials on BioStim 3, and the results were promising. Really promising. With proper funding and another 6 months of development, they could have something ready for FDA submission. Something that would actually work. Something that would make them all very wealthy. Harvey smiled at his computer screen. Constance and Mitchell thought they were so clever, plotting in secret, convinced Harvey was too wrapped up in his work to notice. They had no idea he'd been 10 steps ahead of them from the beginning. His phone buzzed. A text from Jean Hobbs. She hired Della Barber. Official filing expected within 2 weeks. "Are you ready?" Harvey typed back. "Let them come." 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, Harvey was in his office at Maddox Biotech when Constance called. "Harvey, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight with forced emotion. "In person. Can you come home? I'm in the middle of. Please. It's important." He arrived home to find Constance sitting at the dining room table, papers spread before her. She'd been crying, or at least wanted him to think she had. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged artfully. "I can't do this anymore," she said as soon as he walked in. This marriage. I've tried, Harvey, but I can't live like this. You're married to your work, and I'm just an afterthought." Harvey sat down across from her, saying nothing. "I filed for divorce," Constance continued. "These are the papers. I'm being fair, Harvey. I'm only asking for what's legally mine. The house, half the investments, and half your stake in Maddox Biotech." "Half my stake," Harvey repeated slowly. "It's only right. I supported you while you built that company. I gave up my own career advancement to be there for you. The least you can do is acknowledge my contribution." The sheer audacity of it nearly made him laugh. Constance had worked at the same marketing firm for 8 years, with the same title, because she was mediocre at her job, and everyone knew it. Her career advancement had consisted of showing up late and leaving early while billing clients for hours she never worked. But he kept his face neutral. "I see. And you've already hired an attorney?" "Della Barber. She's very good." Constance met his eyes, defiant now. "I know you'll probably fight this, but Harvey, I'm prepared for that. I have documentation of everything. Our finances, the company structure, my contributions to your success. A judge will see that I deserve this." "I'm sure they will," Harvey said quietly. He picked up the divorce papers and flipped through them. Della Barber had been thorough. He had to give her that. The filing demanded not just half his equity in Maddox Biotech, but also the house, their joint investment accounts, and even the Audi they bought last year. "I'll have my attorney look these over," Harvey said, standing. "I assume you'll want me to move out?" Constance had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Maybe just for now, until things are settled. You could stay at the company apartment." Maddox Biotech kept a small apartment near the office for out-of-town visitors and late-night work sessions. Harvey nodded. "Fine. I'll pack a bag." He went upstairs to their bedroom and methodically filled a duffel with clothes and toiletries. Constance didn't follow him. When he came back down, she was on her phone, typing rapidly. Probably texting Mitchell, telling him the deed was done. At the door, Harvey paused. "Constance." She looked up. "Yes. I just want you to know that I did love you. I still do in a way. And I'm sorry it came to this." For a moment, something like guilt flickered across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. "Me too, Harvey. But this is for the best." He nodded and walked out of the house he'd bought with his first real paycheck from Maddox Biotech, the house where he'd carried her over the threshold 8 years ago, believing they'd grow old together. The door closed behind him, and Harvey Maddox allowed himself one moment of genuine grief for the death of his marriage. Then he pulled out his phone and called Jean Hobbs. "It's done," he said. She filed. "Now, we move to phase 2. The next 4 months were a masterclass in strategic patience. Jean Hobbs engaged Della Barber in precisely the kind of legal battle she expected. Aggressive, expensive, and ultimately futile. Harvey appeared to fight the divorce settlement with every tool at his disposal, contesting every asset division, every valuation, every claim. Behind the scenes, he was doing something entirely different. Mitchell Day, believing himself secure in his impending victory, stopped paying attention to the day-to-day operations of Maddox Biotech. He was too busy planning his future with Constance, too distracted by fantasies of controlling the company, to notice that Harvey was quietly restructuring everything. Harvey renegotiated the contracts with the 3 major hospital networks, inserting clauses that made them contingent on BioStem 7's FDA approval. When approval was denied, the contracts would automatically terminate with penalty fees payable by Maddox Biotech. He also restructured the employee stock option plan, creating massive acceleration clauses that would trigger if there was a change in company leadership. When Constance took over, every employee with options would be entitled to immediate vesting and payout, a liability of roughly $3 million that didn't currently exist on the balance sheet. Most importantly, he continued developing BioStem 3 and BioStem 5 at Maddox Therapeutics, now working with a team of 5 brilliant researchers who'd quietly left biotech to join him. The intellectual property was carefully documented, filed, and owned entirely by the new company. Jean handled all the legal maneuvering with practiced skill. In court, he made impassioned arguments about Harvey's contributions to the company, about the unfairness of Constance claiming half the equity in something she'd had no hand in building. Della Barber countered with equally passionate arguments about community property and marital support. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Wong, listened to both sides with evident skepticism. At one hearing, she'd looked directly at Harvey and asked, "Mr. Maddox, why don't you just accept that California law is clear on this matter? Your wife is entitled to her share of marital assets." Harvey, following Jean's carefully scripted response, had replied, "Your Honor, this company is my life's work. It's like asking me to cut off my own arm." Judge Wong had sighed. "Mr. Maddox, many people feel that way about their businesses. It doesn't change the law." After 6 months of legal wrangling, Jean finally came to Harvey with the inevitable news. "The judge is going to rule in Constance's favor," he said, sitting in Harvey's temporary apartment near the biotech offices. "She's indicated that unless you can prove significant separate property contributions, she's going to award Constance 50% of your equity in Maddox Biotech." Harvey nodded. "Good." Jean raised an eyebrow. "Good. It's time to stop fighting," Harvey said. "I want you to approach Della Barber with a settlement offer. I'll give Constance everything she's asking for. The house, the investments, and 100% of my equity in Maddox Biotech." 100%? Harvey, that's what I want to do. In exchange, I get to walk away clean. No alimony, no ongoing claims against any future business ventures. Complete separation of all debts and liabilities. Harvey met his attorney's eyes. "Can you make that happen?" Jean was quiet for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "You magnificent bastard. You're giving her the whole poisoned apple." "I'm giving her exactly what she wanted," Harvey corrected. "Make the offer." Della Barber, predictably, couldn't believe her luck. She called Jean within 2 hours of receiving the settlement proposal. "What's the catch?" she asked suspiciously. "No catch," Jean replied smoothly. "My client is tired of fighting. He recognizes that California law is on your client's side, and he wants to move on with his life. He built one successful company. He's confident he can build another. He's willing to give Mrs. Maddox full ownership of Maddox Biotech in exchange for a clean break. Full ownership, Della repeated. Not just half his equity. All of it. That's correct. He'd like to avoid the spectacle of a trial, the negative publicity, the further legal fees. This way, everyone gets what they want. There was a long pause. I'll need to consult with my client. Of course. We're prepared to execute the transfer within 30 days if Mrs. Maddox agrees. Constance called Harvey directly that evening. Her voice was bright with barely suppressed triumph. Harvey, Della told me about your settlement offer. Are you serious? Completely serious, Harvey said, injecting just the right note of weary defeat into his voice. I can't keep doing this, Constance. The fighting, the lawyers, the stress. You were right. We've grown apart, and trying to hang on to the past isn't healthy for either of us. So you're just giving me the company? I'm giving you your fair share of our marital assets, Harvey said. The company is worth $15 million according to the last valuation. You deserve half of my equity, which is about $7.5 million. I'm offering you the whole thing because I don't want to be business partners with my ex-wife. It's cleaner this way. He could practically hear her mind working, calculating. That's very generous of you. I built Maddox Biotech once. I can do it again. I just want to move forward. Okay, Constance said, trying and failing to keep the glee out of her voice. Okay, yes. I accept your offer. Let's do this. 3 weeks later, Harvey sat in a conference room at Gene Hobbs' law office, signing papers that transferred complete ownership of Maddox Biotech to Constance Eden Maddox. Mitchell Day was there too, standing behind Constance with a hand on her shoulder, his expression smug. No hard feelings, Harvey, Mitchell said as Harvey signed the last page. You're a brilliant scientist, but business was never really your strong suit. The company will be in good hands. Harvey looked up at the man who'd been his partner, his friend, who'd betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible. I'm sure it will be, he said evenly. Good luck, Mitchell. You're going to need it. The final court hearing was almost anticlimactic. Judge Wong reviewed the settlement agreement, asked Harvey several times if he was certain he understood what he was giving up, and then approved the divorce. Maddox Biotech now belonged entirely to Constance. The house, the investments, everything was hers. Della Barber shook her client's hand. Congratulations, Ms. Eaton. This is the largest settlement I've ever negotiated. Constance beamed. As Harvey walked past her on his way out of the courtroom, she actually laughed. Thank you, Harvey, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Thank you for being such a fool. Harvey paused, looked at her one last time, and smiled. You're welcome, Constance. Enjoy your victory. That night, Mitchell and Constance celebrated at an expensive restaurant in downtown San Diego. Carlos Osborne, who'd been maintaining his surveillance, sent Harvey photos of them toasting with champagne, their faces glowing with triumph. Harvey looked at the photos for exactly 3 seconds, then deleted them. He didn't need them anymore. Everything was in motion now. 3 days after the divorce was finalized, Harvey was in his new office at Maddox Therapeutics, a sleek space in a modern building, funded by Steven Slater's investment, when his phone rang. It was Julia Camacho. Harvey, you need to see this, she said, her voice urgent. The FDA just released its review of BioStim 7. And complete rejection. They cited the exact cellular toxicity issues you identified 8 months ago. They're also recommending that all current trials be halted immediately and that all test subjects be contacted for follow-up monitoring. Harvey felt a grim satisfaction. When did the letter go out? This morning. It's already public. The FDA posted it on their website. Thank you, Julia. I'll handle it from here. He hung up and called Gene Hobbs. It started. How long until the lawsuits hit? I've already heard from 3 investors' attorneys, Gene replied. They're claiming they were misled about BioStim 7's viability. They want their money back with damages. The hospital networks are also calling. Those penalty clauses in the contracts? They're being triggered as we speak. Good. What about the employees? The stock option accelerations kicked in the moment Constance took over as majority owner. That's a $3 million liability that has to be paid within 90 days according to the restructured plan you put in place. Harvey did some quick math. FDA rejection meant the company's valuation would crash. The lawsuits from investors would drain what little capital remained. The contract penalties would add millions more in obligations. The employee payouts would finish off any liquidity. Maddox Biotech, the company he'd spent 12 years building, was about to collapse under the weight of its own toxic assets. And Constance owned 100% of it. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Constance calling. Harvey answered. Hello. What the fuck did you do? Constance screamed. Harvey, what the fuck did you do to the company? I didn't do anything, Harvey said calmly. BioStem. 7 failed FDA approval. These things happen in biotech. It's a risky industry. You knew it was going to fail, and you gave me the company anyway. I discovered the problems with BioStem 7-8 months ago, Harvey confirmed. Right around the time you started sleeping with Mitchell. Actually, I tried to salvage it, but some things can't be fixed. There was a strangled sound from Constance's end. You set me up. You gave me a worthless company. I gave you exactly what you asked for, Harvey corrected. You demanded Maddox Biotech. You got it. All of it. The assets and the liabilities. That's how business works, Constance. The investors are suing. The hospitals are demanding millions in penalties. The employees are all quitting and demanding their stock options be paid out. This is insane. I restructured some things before the transfer, Harvey admitted. Made sure all the contingent liabilities were properly documented. Your attorney should have caught them during due diligence, but I guess Della Barber isn't as good as her reputation suggests. You son of a bitch. Actually, I prefer to think of it as giving you a learning experience. You wanted to be a CEO? Congratulations. You're about to learn what it's like when a company implodes. Mitchell says we can sue you. He says you committed fraud. Harvey laughed. A genuine sound of amusement. Mitchell is welcome to try, but I documented everything. Every decision was made in good faith as CEO of the company. Every restructuring was approved by the board, which included Mitchell, by the way. He signed off on all of it. You're destroying me. No, Constance, you destroyed yourself. You got greedy. You thought you could steal everything I built and walk away laughing. Instead, you're going to spend the next decade dealing with lawsuits, bankruptcy proceedings, and the complete destruction of your reputation. You could hear her crying now, real tears this time. Harvey, please. We can fix this. We can work together. We're done, Harvey said flatly. You made your choice. Now live with it. What am I supposed to do? Harvey smiled, even though she couldn't see it. You took everything. I gave nothing. He hung up. The phone immediately started ringing again, but he ignored it. Instead, he called Steven Slater. Steven, it's time. I want to announce Maddox Therapeutics to the industry. Full press release. We got BioStem 3 and BioStem 5 ready for phase 2 trials. We got a team of brilliant researchers, and we got the funding to see it through. The timing is perfect, Steven said. With Maddox Biotech's collapse in the news, everyone will be looking for the next big thing in neural regeneration therapy. You're going to look like a phoenix rising from the ashes. That's the idea. I also want Julia Camacho listed as Chief Science Officer and partial owner. She's earned it. Done. I'll have my PR team draft the release. Harvey, yeah. That was the most ruthless business maneuver I've ever witnessed. Remind me never to cross you. Harvey hung up and looked around his new office. Through the window, he could see the San Diego skyline, the same view he'd had from Maddox Biotech, but from a different angle. Everything old made new again. His phone buzzed with a text from Carlos Osborne. Mitchell Day just got fired from his board positions. Word is spreading about the affair and the attempted takeover. His reputation is finished. Harvey replied, good. Make sure everyone knows exactly what he did. Another text came through, this one from Jean Hobbs. Constance's attorneys are calling. She wants to negotiate giving the company back to you in exchange for assuming the liabilities. Harvey laughed out loud. Tell her no. She wanted it. She can keep it. Over the next 6 weeks, Harvey watched from a comfortable distance as Constance and Mitchell's world fell apart. The The lawsuits piled up. The investors who'd been lied to about BioStem 7's prospects wanted blood and money, not necessarily in that order. The hospital networks demanded the penalty fees, which totaled nearly $4 million that Maddox Biotech didn't have. The employee stock options became a nightmare. 53 current and former employees demanded immediate payout of their vested options, as was their right under the restructured plan. Constance tried to argue that the restructuring was fraudulent, but Gene Hobbs produced documentation showing that Mitchell Day himself had approved every change as a member of the board. Mitchell, facing his own ruin, turned on Constance. In a desperate attempt to save himself, he claimed she'd been the mastermind behind the whole scheme, that she'd seduced him into betraying Harvey. It didn't work. The private investigators' reports, which Carlos Osborne had carefully leaked to key industry contacts, showed clear evidence that both Mitchell and Constance had planned the takeover together. Mitchell lost his board positions, his consulting contracts, and his reputation. Within 2 months, he filed for bankruptcy and moved back in with his elderly parents in Arizona. Constance fared even worse. As the sole owner of Maddox Biotech, she was personally liable for the company's debts. She tried to declare bankruptcy, but Gene Hobbs, representing several of the creditors, successfully argued that she'd taken ownership of the company through fraud, making some of the debts non-dischargeable. The house in La Jolla was sold to pay creditors. The Audi was repossessed. The investment accounts were frozen and eventually liquidated. Constance, who'd celebrated taking Harvey for everything he had, ended up living in a one-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town, working as a receptionist at a dental office because no marketing firm would hire her after the scandal. Meanwhile, Maddox Therapeutics thrived. The announcement of Harvey's new company made waves in the biotech industry. BioStem 3, the neural pathway regeneration treatment that actually worked, completed phase 2 trials with flying colors. Early projections suggested it could be worth hundreds of millions once FDA approval came through. Harvey hired 20 employees, offering generous equity stakes and competitive salaries. Julia Camacho became a minor celebrity in research circles, giving talks about their breakthrough approach to neural regeneration. Steven Slater's investment multiplied tenfold in valuation within the first year. One evening, about 4 months after the divorce was finalized, Harvey sat in his office reviewing the latest trial data. His phone rang. Constance again. She called 17 times in the past month. He'd answered exactly once, to tell her she needed to stop contacting him or he'd get a restraining order. This time, he let go to voicemail. Later, he listened to the message. Harvey, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about everything. Mitchell, he convinced me that you didn't appreciate me, that I deserved more. I was stupid and greedy, and I destroyed everything. The lawsuits are killing me. I can't afford a lawyer. The creditors are coming after my wages. I don't have anything left. Her voice broke. I know I don't deserve your help. But please, please, Harvey, for what we used to have, help me. He deleted the message without finishing it. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. Julia poked her head in. Hey, boss. Want to grab dinner? The team's going to that new sushi place downtown. Harvey smiled. Sure. Let me just finish up here. Take your time. Oh, and Harvey. Julia's expression turned serious. I know what you did. With Maddox Biotech. Constance. All of it. Harvey went still. Julia, I'm not judging you, she said quickly. They tried to steal everything from you. You protected yourself and your work. I get it. I just want you to know, I'm glad you won. You deserve to win. She left before he could respond. Harvey sat alone in his office for a long moment, thinking about choices and consequences, about loyalty and betrayal, about the cost of revenge and the price of justice. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Maddox Biotech had officially declared bankruptcy. All assets would be liquidated to pay creditors. Constance Eaton Maddox was listed as the majority creditor defendant in 17 separate lawsuits. Harvey read the article, then closed his phone and stood up. He grabbed his jacket and headed out to join his team for dinner. The past was behind him now. He'd built something new, something better, something that couldn't be taken away. As he walked to his car, he thought about those 6 words he'd said to Constance on the phone. The words that had finally made her understand what he'd done. "You took everything. I gave nothing." It was true. Constance had taken his company, his money, his marriage. But everything she'd taken was worthless. Everything of real value. The intellectual property, the talented researchers, the promising treatments, the future, Harvey had kept for himself. He'd given her nothing but the appearance of victory. And that appearance had destroyed her. Harvey Maddox drove through the streets of San Diego toward his new life, leaving the wreckage of his old one behind. He'd learned a valuable lesson from the whole experience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's giving them exactly what they ask for and watching them destroy themselves. 6 months later, Maddox Therapeutics announced its Series B funding round. $50 million led by a consortium of top-tier venture capital firms. BioStem 3 was advancing to Phase 3 trials. BioStem 5 showed even more promise, with potential applications beyond neural regeneration. Harvey stood on stage at a biotech conference in San Francisco, giving a keynote address about perseverance and innovation. In the audience, he spotted some familiar faces: Steven Slater, beaming with pride; Julia Camacho, taking notes for her own upcoming talk; Gene Hobbs, who'd flown up just to watch Harvey's triumph. The questions from the audience were predictable. How'd he bounce back so quickly from Maddox Biotech's collapse? What advice did he have for entrepreneurs facing setbacks? Harvey answered with practiced humility, talking about the importance of focusing on good science, building a strong team, and never giving up on your vision. He didn't mention Constance or Mitchell or the divorce. He didn't need to. Everyone in the industry knew the story by now. After the talk, a young researcher approached him nervously. "Mr. Maddox, I just wanted to say, what happened to you with your ex-wife and your partner? It was terrible, but the way you came back from it is inspiring." Harvey shook the young man's hand. "Thank you, but I didn't come back from anything. I just kept moving forward." That was his final lesson from the whole ordeal. Revenge wasn't about looking back, about dwelling on who'd wronged you and how to hurt them. Real revenge was building something so successful, so undeniably brilliant, that everyone who doubted you or betrayed you had to watch you succeed while they failed. Constance and Mitchell had tried to take his life's work. Instead, they'd given him the motivation to build something even better. They'd thought they were destroying him. In reality, they'd freed him from a failing marriage and a disloyal partner, clearing the way for his greatest success. 2 years after the divorce, Maddox Therapeutics went public. The IPO was a massive success, valuing the company at $800 million. Harvey's personal net worth exceeded $200 million overnight. Julia Camacho became a multimillionaire. Steven Slater's return on investment was over 3,000%. Harvey used some of his new wealth to establish a scholarship fund for young scientists from disadvantaged backgrounds. He endowed a research chair at his alma mater. He bought a beautiful house in Del Mar with an ocean view and a state-of-the-art home laboratory. He never remarried, though he dated occasionally. He never forgot what Constance and Mitchell had tried to do to him, but he also never wasted energy hating them. They'd become irrelevant to his life, footnotes in a story that was really about resilience and vindication. One evening, 3 years after everything had ended, Harvey's doorbell rang. He opened it to find an older woman he didn't recognize. "Mr. Maddox? I'm Sylvia Carey, Constance's mother." Harvey tensed. "Mrs. Carey, what can I do for you?" "I came to apologize." The woman's eyes were red from crying. "For my daughter, for what she did to you. I know it doesn't mean anything coming from me, but I'm so sorry." "How is Constance?" Harvey asked, surprising himself with the question. "Not well. She's still dealing with lawsuits. Still trying to rebuild her life. She knows she destroyed everything, and she has to live with that." Sylvia Carey met his eyes. "I won't ask you to forgive her. I'm not sure I've forgiven her myself for what she did. I just wanted you to know that I always thought you were a good man. You didn't deserve any of it." Harvey nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." After she left, Harvey poured himself a glass of wine and sat on his deck, watching the sunset over the Pacific. He thought about forgiveness and whether he'd truly forgiven Constance and Mitchell. The honest answer was no, not really. But he'd moved beyond needing to forgive them. They'd hurt him, yes. But in trying to destroy him, they'd ultimately made him stronger. That was the thing about revenge. The best kind didn't require you to lift a finger against your enemies. It just required you to be smarter, more patient, and more strategic than they were. It required you to see several moves ahead, to understand consequences in human nature, to know when to fight and when to appear to surrender. Harvey had given Constance exactly what she wanted, his company. And in doing so, he'd given her exactly what she deserved, the destruction of her own greed and betrayal. He raised his glass to the setting sun, to the future, to the life he'd built from the ashes of his old one. You took everything, he said quietly to the ocean breeze. I gave nothing. And then he smiled, finished his wine, and went inside to review the latest research data from his team. Because while revenge had been satisfying, success was better. And Harvey Maddox had learned that the greatest victory wasn't destroying your enemies. It was becoming so successful that they destroyed themselves trying to become you. The story of Harvey Maddox and his spectacular comeback became legendary in Silicon Valley and biotech circles. Business school professors taught it as a case study in strategic thinking. Entrepreneurs told it as a cautionary tale about greed and loyalty. Researchers quoted it as inspiration during difficult times. But for Harvey himself, it was simply the story of how he'd taken the worst betrayal of his life and turned it into the catalyst for his greatest triumph. He'd been tested, betrayed, and nearly broken. Instead of breaking, he'd bent. He'd adapted. He'd won. And in the end, that was all that mattered. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.